Sixth graders, this video goes over filling out and completing the worksheets that we are doing in class called What Time Is It? So I'm going to click on the first informational page. What time is it? So this is, as it says, an overview of BCAD and BCE and CE. So understanding the difference between the two. Again, as we talked before when we looked at the timeline, BCAD is that time period before Christ. It's in the year of the Lord. The timeline is based around the birth of Jesus Christ. In our current year would be considered AD. Whereas the secular time period that we talked about, secular meaning non-religious time periods, we would have BCE, before Common Era. We'd have CE, Common Era, and the time period that we live in now would be Common Era, the CE. Okay, so some of the rules. Remember, the year zero doesn't really exist. Okay, it's unknown what that time period is, how long it lasted, so we just say that it doesn't really exist. So there's no real zero. BCE, BC, the higher the number, the earlier the event that happened. So the example is 1000 BCE happened before 500 BCE, okay, before. In regards to CE and AD, the higher the number, the later the event happened. So, for example, 2000 CE happened after 1000 CE, okay? So as we talked when we looked at that timeline, you know, as we have a birth date now in Common Era, the CE time period, that number gets larger. Okay? It's opposite for BCE or that time period. So, continuing, when discussing modern times in the Common Era, CE is often assumed. So we normally, if we write 2020, we normally don't write 2020 CE, okay, or AD. We just assume that we know that it's 2020 Common Era. Okay, that's the time period that we're living in. This next worksheet is giving you the opportunity to practice using those time periods and trying to better understand them. So what I'm going to do in order to be able to write on this is I'm going to click on the square with the arrow, the 3 dots in the top right hand corner, and I'm going to send a copy to Notability. And then from there I'm going to create a new note, and I'm going to import it. The first activity is looking at what is the difference. So figure out how many years separate the two events in each of the questions below. So we're looking at the invention of the Gutenberg printing press in 1450 CE, Common Era, and the invention of the World Wide Web in 1991 CE. I have to say I remember that. All right, so because they're both Common Era, and what I like to do is I like to underline those eras. And because they're the same, then I subtract. So 1999 minus 1450. And when I subtract those two numbers, I get 541 is my answer. So the next one, the rule of King Tut in 1334 BCE, and the rule of Ashoka. And that happened in 268 BC. We will talk about King Tut, but not Ashoka. So we have BCE, BCE. So again, we would subtract. Looking at number 3, we have CE, Common Era, and BCE. So the Persian War, which we will talk about. World War II, you will talk about later on in your social studies. So with that, you would add those because remember they cross that threshold of 0, so you need to add those two numbers together. Hammurabi's Code is in 1750 BCE, and then the U.S. Constitution is ratified in 1788 CE. That's Common Era. Again, those two cross that threshold, so you would add those numbers together to get your answers. Okay. Part 2, how old were they? When we're looking at part 2, it says, determine how old each of the people were using their birth date and death dates. So with this, we'll look at, again, that BCE or CE and see if they're the same or if they're different. So Alexander the Great, we will actually be talking about Alexander the Great, 365 BCE to 323 BCE. Again, what we need to do because they're the same Common Era, we're going to subtract and we'll find out that he only lived to be 33 years old. Okay, led quite a few huge armies. The next one that we'll be talking about is Hatshepsut. You can still do Rosa Parks, but we'll be talking about Hatshepsut number 7, 1508 BCE, and then 1458 BCE. So because they are of the same time period, we will subtract those numbers. The other one that we'll talk about, another one we'll talk about is Augustus, number 10. And Augustus was born in 63 BCE and died in 14 CE. So because those are of different time periods, then again, that crosses that 0 threshold, then you need to add those together. Hammurabi is the last one from this group that we will be talking about. And Hammurabi is 1811 BCE to 1750 BCE. So same before Common Era, same time period. So we'll be subtracting those two numbers together. The others you can do, make sure you check to see if they are same time period or different time periods. That will tell you if you add or subtract. And then the last activity that we're doing is create a timeline. It says for each timeline, put the selected events in order in which they happened. So we're going to look at these 4 different events, and on the timeline, we are going to categorize them from what happened first to what happened most recent. So we have the American Revolution starts in 1765 CE, Common Era. Cuneiform invented, which we will talk about, in 3500 BCE. The Great Fire of Rome in 64, and that's in Common Era. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we will talk about Rome. And then the last one, King Tut begins rule in 1334 BCE. So we know that BCE comes before CE, because before Common Era comes before. So we're going to look at these two numbers first and figure out which one happened first. Because the 3,500 is a larger number, we know that in that time period before the 0, we know that came first because it's a larger number. So on our timeline, I'm not going to have you write everything out, but I do want you to write those numbers out. So we would have 3,500 BCE, okay? And then the next one in the BCE time period would be when King Tut rules, and that would be 1334 BCE, okay? And then looking at the other 2 time periods of CE, we do the opposite. Whichever one is a smaller number is which one happened first. So that would be the Great Fire of Rome, happened in 64 Common Era. And then the most recent one to happen is the American Revolution starts, just what you learned last year, 1765 Common Era. And you guys probably called it AD or didn't even give it a title after that. You'll do the same for number 14. Again, look at the BCE versus the CE. If you need to use the notes on the other page, you can use those notes. This does not need to be handed in. If you are gone for the day, please make sure that you at least show me a copy when you return, or you can send it to me. There's nothing to upload or anything like that. This is not an assignment. This is just an activity for us to understand the time of BCE versus CE a little bit better. Thank you.